Welcome to The Christian Atheist, Episode 10, Part 1, The Context of the Looking Glass, Personal Background. In July of 2019, I proposed marriage to my best friend, Jenny Leininger, as our children swam together at Overlook Pool. We'd become friends over the last 2 years, during which time both our spouses had died. Before the moment of proposal, we had never discussed any sort of romantic relationship, never dated. I had watched Jenny shepherding her family through death and its aftermath. I admired her deeply for her quiet inner strength, her understated, underappreciated wisdom and competence, her diffident self-confidence. You know I love a paradox that set her apart from every woman I'd ever known. We became fast, and sometimes furious, texting friends after I offered to drive her husband to one of his final cancer treatments. After his death, I occasionally helped with maintenance and car issues when she would allow it. We met, for the first time, at a church small group meeting. Jenny's eyes haunt me from that day to this. Their depth and clarity became my portal, my looking glass. In her eyes, I would see myself for the first time in decades. I had promised my wife, Rain, that I would raise our daughter, Reagan, in the church. We had begun attending Harvest Bible Church in the summer of 2015. Following a series of hospital crises in fall of that year, we learned that Rain's illness was a form of dementia, not Parkinson's, as we had originally been told. This diagnosis eventually landed her in a nursing home. The progressive loss of someone to dementia is devastating under the best of circumstances, but our marriage was difficult all through its 27 years. And the months leading up to her being medically mandated to nursing home care were complicated and traumatic. When she moved into the nursing home in October of 2015, I experienced many different emotions. But chief among them, a yawning existential sense of freedom. I was, suddenly, fully responsible for myself, our child, and all our affairs. But mostly, I was free of the pressing weight of her judgment and her sensitivities, which I had allowed to imprison me. The extra weight of responsibility was welcome, if daunting, but the sense of freedom from constantly walking on eggshells was ineffable, frightening, and exhilarating. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2013, and the following years, 2 of them, passed in a fog of ongoing physical and increasingly more pressing mental issues, doctor's appointments, medications, and procedures. I worked full-time as an auto mechanic and part-time as an online professor, having stopped full-time teaching around the time of the diagnosis, and I was remodeling our home in my free time. By the time October of 2015 rolled around, I was, for the first and only time in my life, dangerously close to a breakdown. I held on by a tenuous thread. Rain's children, especially her daughter, were of tremendous help. Although I never told anyone of my threatening dissolution, I slowly learned to face, moment by moment, those overwhelming, wave-like attacks. Breathing became an explicit and conscious practice for me, as this was the first defense I developed for fending off the darkness, the knot in my stomach, the swirling mental chaos. Slowly, I learned through breathing and relaxation to hold the line, finding myself, strangely, stronger than I ever thought I was capable of being. In many ways, the crisis relaxed for me when my wife was placed in the nursing home. There were plenty of difficulties remaining, but the uncertainty, my inability to care for her at home, had resolved. And the separation, though painful, was also rejuvenating, allowing a brand new start in my thinking and action. I renewed an acquaintance with my family that I had allowed to languish for nearly the entirety of my married life, feeling very much the prodigal returning to a welcome he did not deserve. My wife was a strong and powerful woman, a force of nature, and watching her decline while doing my best to make it livable for her was painful and draining. She was faithful to me, and as a believer in Christ, endured my atheism throughout our marriage, which was not an easy pill to swallow. Neither one of us was perfect in our relationship. Jordan Peterson helped me see my failings with painful clarity. But I remained faithful to the end, and of that I am proud. By November of 2018, my wife had entered a death spiral. I also learned that my employer, Sears Automotive, was shutting down our store. I would lose my job and my wife at nearly the same time. Again, this was a mixed bag. The closing of doors on the past was sad, but I had imbibed enough Jordan Peterson by this time that I was able to look at endings also as beginnings. And, I confess, I was hopeful, not devastated, as those endings approached. I wanted a new start. As it turned out, God had a great many more endings in store for me. A phoenix-like conflagration that would consume nearly every aspect of my life, and from which I would emerge into a second Eden. I had been an atheist for 25 years now, and everyone who knew me at any level of depth knew that. I saw absolutely no path back to belief in God. It was as if I had thrown a one-way switch to atheism. There was no way to reverse it. I would have done so long ago had I found a way, as I remembered the simplicity and clarity of belief that Christianity had given me in my youth. I wanted that again, but I knew too much now. Science, philosophy, psychology, astrophysics, quantum theory, comparative religions, and, I thought, all of this militated against Christian belief. The parishioners and leadership at our church were kind and caring with me and Reagan. They welcomed us with open arms, and some reached out to convert me, though few tried to understand me. I knew all the arguments for God's existence better than those who gave them to me, and found them unconvincing, as I still do today. These Christians were, for me, quaint, but almost nothing they had to say was in any way helpful, as I'd lived in their shoes years ago. Their actions, though, and of several in the church, and their attitudes towards me and my situation were deeply felt and appreciated. Jenny and I saw one another and conversed occasionally in church, with great reserve, but mostly we texted. Having lost her husband to cancer, she understood the agony of waiting, enduring while holding on with white knuckles, fighting to maintain life, sanity, and family. She was grace itself and strength, having raised and homeschooled 7 children. I dubbed her Wonder Woman during this time, using the Five for Fighting song Superman to reinforce my admiration. Jenny listened and thought and interacted. She clearly loved God like few I'd ever met, but she never played the game that most Christians did with me. She was just herself and allowed me the same courtesy. I learned that she was somewhat unconventional and unsettled with the church, though few knew that. She thought for herself, was independent and daring, if quiet and reserved. We texted a few times each week, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, and sometimes not at all for long stretches. She did not always like me or what I had to say, but we were friends with unspoken and profound understanding. My wife died peacefully in February of 2019. She is, at last, at peace in the loving arms of her Savior, immune to disappointment and pain. I take tremendous joy in that. I have no doubt that God had me in her life all those years for His purposes. And I am who I am now because of His providential care during those years. Those moments after, with family and friends, will remain etched in my mind for life. My sole goal in the process was to ease the pain of her children. In that, I failed. The pain was too new, raw, and sharp, and I was too obtuse. Life moved forward. On the Sunday following my wife's death, I spontaneously hugged Jenny at church after Sunday school, our only physical contact. She was my best, my only friend. I lost my job at Sears in March, and a series of sure things designed to return me to full-time teaching. My wife's passing opened that possibility again for the first time in 7 years. All fell through. Everywhere I turned, confident of finding full-time employment, nothing materialized. I was, of course, still teaching online, but I knew that I needed more if I were to succeed at my plan. Jordan Peterson had convinced me to charge forward into life and not dwell on my losses. And I was determined to do so, to slay the dragons and redeem this world's sufferings as far as I could. This was my task, and I needed a partner. So I signed up for a dating site. I had 2 or 3 interactions and 1 date. Each woman, over the weeks of looking, manifested one fatal fault. She wasn't Jenny. Jenny, though, was beyond my pursuit, and in the most rigorous way. To consider her as a romantic interest was to violate what was, for me, a sacred obligation, respect for her faith. I knew Christian teaching on this topic. Christians may not marry non-Christians, so despite my growing unspoken recognition that she embodied what I wanted, needed, I could not, would not subject her to my pursuit. At the same time, my concern for her well-being was growing. She was expressing a deep-seated sense of dislocation, listlessness, and lack of purpose. Her favorite metaphor was that of being stuck in jello, unable to move, change, or progress. Events and people were spiraling around her. She was feeling trapped, used and hurt in the midst of God's people. She trusted God, but was stuck waiting, without resolution. My desire to help had been present from our first interaction, but she allowed little assistance from me, and I never sought to push, just to be a resource. I resolved to do what I could from a distance. This was the best I could ever hope for. I had fallen for Jenny, beyond my capacity to understand, and our friendship was deep, powerful, and more valuable to me than anything else I'd ever experienced. She knew me already at a level that no one else ever did. She knew my story, my past commitment to Christ, and my falling away. She knew my life in the present, my thought processes and actions. She knew me better than my own family. We were struck, as is said, from the same mold, knowing one another from the inside out. I began to realize that for me, she would always be more than a friend, but that I must never ask for that more until I did. I worried for her present and for her future. We both had had difficult marriages, endured them, and I feared she might fall into another. This consideration began to wear on me, and I began to rationalize to myself that I could at least save her from that fate, even if I couldn't give her a Christian mate. In other words, I considered what I knew to be wrong, to get what I wanted more than anything. In doing so, I nearly tore my soul in two. I was undermining my very existence, reaching for what I valued so deeply that I was willing to destroy it to have it. Talk about contradiction and paradox. Having yet again expressed her ongoing frustration with her life to me, there that day by the pool, I said to Jenny, "Well, then you should marry me." She responded quickly, with purpose and emotion. "John, if you were a Christian, I would pack the car tonight and marry you tomorrow." Admitting to myself that I loved and wanted Jenny was one thing. Knowing now that my feelings were reciprocated threw my world into unimaginable chaos. In the briefest of moments, I became responsible not only for my own original sin in asking, but also for the pearl of great price I had just offered to buy with capital I had no right to spend. Stay tuned for our conclusion, Through the Looking Glass, the denouement. If you haven't yet watched the series of Christian Atheists in sequence, please do so now, as these final 2 episodes will only make sense in context. Please like and subscribe. We're almost to our goal of 100 subscribers, if you have not yet done so. See you next time. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all 3 in this post.